The forest was quiet, almost too quiet, as the sun began to set behind the trees. A lone truck rumbled down the dirt road, its headlights barely cutting through the growing fog. Inside the truck, a man named Carter gripped the steering wheel. With both hands, his eyes darting from side to side, scanning the road for any signs of movement. He'd been driving for hours, lost in thought, when something strange caught his attention. It was a shape lying in the middle of the road. At first, Carter thought it might be an animal, maybe a deer, but as he got closer, he saw that it wasn't an animal at all. It was a woman. A woman with fox-like features. His heart skipped a beat as he slammed on the brakes. The truck screeched to a halt just inches from the figure. Carter's eyes widened in shock. The woman had orange fur along her ears, tail, and arms, and her eyes gleamed with an unsettling glow. She was crawling slowly on all fours, her body trembling from what seemed to be exhaustion or injury. Carter quickly got out of the truck, his boots crunching on the gravel. He approached her cautiously, unsure of what to do. Was she a human, an alien, some kind of creature? He wasn't sure, but something about her made his skin crawl and his heart race. "Hey, are you okay?" Carter called out, his voice shaky. Woman didn't respond, but her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, it felt as though she was searching his soul. He took another step forward, reaching out to help her, but before he could make contact, she flinched and let out a soft whimper. Carter froze, realizing that she wasn't just scared, she was in pain. Her breath was shallow, and her body was covered in bruises. It looked like she had been through some kind of brutal struggle. "Who did this to you?" he muttered, feeling a deep sense of concern for this mysterious creature. Before he could say anything more, the woman's lips parted, and she whispered something in a language he couldn't understand. The words were too quick and garbled, but the tone in her voice was clear. She was in trouble. Carter didn't know what to do, but something inside him told him to help her, no matter what. Suddenly she collapsed, her body slumping to the side. Carter rushed to her side, his heart racing in his chest. He carefully lifted her, carrying her toward the truck. As he did, he noticed a strange sensation on his arm, like something pressing against him. When he looked down, he was horrified to see a faint movement beneath her fur. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, but then it happened again. There was something inside her, something alive. What the hell? Carter whispered, his mind racing. He carefully laid her in the back of the truck, trying to keep her still. As he closed the door, he caught sight of two figures in the distance. They were standing far away, just at the edge of the trees, watching. Carter's instincts kicked in. He didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but something told him they weren't friendly. His grip tightened on the steering wheel again as he started the truck, speeding down the road away from the forest. He couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was at play here, something dangerous. And the woman, or whatever she was somehow at the center of it all. As Carter drove, he glanced back at the mysterious woman in the rearview mirror. Her breathing was still shallow, but now her body seemed to twitch in a way that made Carter even more uneasy. There was no doubt about it. Something was very wrong. Suddenly, she stirred, her eyes opening slightly. She locked eyes with him again, and this time she whispered, barely audible, "Puppies. I'm pregnant with puppies." Carter's mind spun as the words sank in. What did she mean by puppies? Could she be some kind of alien creature, pregnant with some unknown life form? And why was she so badly hurt? But before he could process anything further, the woman's body gave another violent twitch, and she passed out again. The road ahead was dark, but Carter felt a weight pressing down on his chest. He didn't know what he had gotten himself into. But one thing was for sure, this wasn't just a chance encounter. Something much larger and more dangerous was about to unfold, and Carter was at the center of it all. The questions were piling up, but one thing was clear. This strange woman with fox-like features was more than just a victim of an accident. And Carter had just become a key player in something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. Asterisk. Carter's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he sped down the road, the headlights illuminating the dark path ahead. The forest around him seemed to close in, the trees growing taller and denser, as if trying to hide him from something. He glanced nervously at the rearview mirror again, but the strange woman was still lying unconscious in the back of the truck. Her. Words echoed in his mind. Pregnant with puppies. The idea felt impossible, but her appearance, her fur, and the strange energy around her told him that this was no ordinary woman. What had he gotten himself into? His mind raced with questions. Who were those figures watching him from the trees? Why had they been standing there waiting? Was there something more to this woman than just a random encounter? And what did she mean by puppies? Was she some kind of alien, or was it something worse? Carter glanced over at the woman again, but she hadn't moved. Her breathing was shallow, and her face was pale, almost ghostly. The glow in her eyes had faded, leaving her looking even more fragile than before. She looked like she might not make it through the night. He had to find help. He pressed down harder on the gas, hoping to make it to the nearest town before the woman's condition worsened. His mind kept wandering back to those figures he had seen earlier. He didn't know who they were, but he knew they weren't ordinary people. They'd been too still, too patient, like they were waiting for something. He didn't know if they had anything to do with the woman, but a strange feeling in his gut told him they did that as the truck bounced over the rough terrain. Carter's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise from the back. It was soft at first, barely noticeable, but then it grew louder. A low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from the woman herself. Carter's heart skipped a beat, and he quickly glanced in the rearview mirror. Her body was twitching again, more violently this time. Her eyes fluttered open, but she didn't look at him. Instead, her gaze was fixed on something else, something deep within herself. She let out a low growl, almost like an animal. Her hands, still covered in soft fur, clenched into fists, her body trembling. "Are you okay?" Carter called out, trying to keep his voice calm, but fear crept into his tone. "You're going to be okay. Just hang on." But she didn't respond. Instead, her body seemed to convulse, and for a moment, Carter thought she was going to break. In half, her breathing quickened, her chest rising and falling rapidly, like something was fighting to get out. He slammed his foot on the brake, pulling the truck to a stop on the side of the road. Panicking, Carter jumped out of the truck and rushed to the back. He opened the door to find the woman, her body now completely stiff, her eyes wide with terror. But it wasn't her face that caught his attention. It was the movement under her fur, the unmistakable sensation that something was trying to break free from within her. Without thinking, Carter reached out and tried to help her, but she cried out in pain, pushing him away with surprising strength. Her fox-like tail swished violently, knocking the side of the truck. Carter stumbled back in shock, his breath catching in his throat. "Please, I just want to help," he said, his voice filled with desperation. But the woman's eyes, wide and wild, told him that help might be the last thing she wanted. Suddenly, with a sharp, horrifying cry, the woman's body seemed to explode in a burst of movement. Carter stepped back, his heart racing as he saw what was happening. It wasn't just her. There were small, wriggling shapes emerging from her body. Several tiny, fox-like creatures, no bigger than a human hand, were pushing their way out of her, covered in the same orange fur as their mother. The woman's chest heaved as she struggled to hold on, but it was clear she couldn't stop it. One by one, the tiny creatures emerged, their eyes blinking in the dim light. They were puppies, alien puppies, but puppies nonetheless. And they were hungry. Carter stood frozen in disbelief, watching the scene unfold before him. The puppies began to crawl toward him, their tiny paws scrambling across the gravel, their soft whimpers filling the air. It was too much to take in all at once. As Carter stood there, trying to process what was happening, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. He spun around, his heart skipping a beat as he saw the same figures from earlier. The ones who had been watching him from the trees. They were closer now, moving toward him with purpose. Their faces were hidden in the shadows, but their eyes glowed with a faint, unnatural light. Carter's instincts screamed at him to run. He had no idea who these people were or what they wanted, but he knew one thing for sure: this wasn't a coincidence. The woman, the puppies, and the mysterious figures all seemed connected, and the danger was only just beginning. His thoughts raced as he glanced at the woman, still struggling in the back of the truck. He had to protect her and the puppies. But how could he, and why were they after her? The questions burned in his mind, but one thing was certain: Carter's life would never be the same again. Carter's heart was pounding as he stood there, the small alien puppies crawling toward him with soft whimpers. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. How could this be real? Aliens, babies, fox-like creatures, none of it seemed possible, yet it was happening right before his eyes. The figures in the distance were getting closer, their glowing eyes cutting through the fog like predators closing in on their prey. Carter instinctively stepped in front of the truck, positioning himself between the approaching strangers and the woman lying in the back. He didn't know who these people were, but he wasn't about to let them hurt her or the puppies. "Stay back," Carter shouted, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. He didn't know what they were capable of, but he wasn't going to stand idly by and let them take the woman. The figures didn't stop. They continued moving forward, their long strides purposeful and unhurried. The closer they got, the clearer their features became. There were 3 of them tall, with angular faces and eyes that seemed to glow unnaturally. They wore dark, sleek suits that reflected the faint light of the truck's headlights, giving them an almost otherworldly appearance. One of them stepped forward, his voice low and steady. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." Carter took a cautious step back, his eyes darting to the woman in the truck. She was still struggling, her body trembling as the puppies continued to emerge. The sight of the tiny creatures wriggling on the gravel made his stomach twist, but it also filled him with an overwhelming sense of protectiveness. These were helpless creatures, and he couldn't let anyone harm them. "What are you? Why are you here?" Carter demanded, his voice growing more desperate. He had to know. Everything was happening too quickly, and the situation was spiraling out of control. The figure who had spoken tilted his head slightly, his glowing eyes never leaving Carter. "We are the Watchers. We've been following this one for years." He motioned toward the woman in the truck. "She is not what you think she is. And those puppies, they are not just babies." Carter felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" "She's just a woman. She's hurt. She needs help." The figure's expression didn't change. "She's not just a woman. She's part of an experiment. Those puppies are a result of something much bigger, something dangerous. And we can't allow them to grow, not like this." The words hung in the air, heavy with warning. Carter's mind reeled. What kind of experiment was this? What was this woman really, and why were these people so determined to stop her and the puppies? "I don't understand," Carter whispered, his eyes flicking between the woman and the Watchers. "You want to take her away? You're going to kill her, aren't you?" The Watcher shook his head, his expression stern. "It's not about killing her. It's about stopping what's coming. If she survives, if those creatures grow, it could mean the end of everything. The world is not ready for what she's carrying inside her." Carter's breath caught in his throat. The end of everything? What kind of creature could cause something like that? And why was it tied to the puppies? A sudden noise interrupted his thoughts, a loud, sharp cry from the woman in the back of the truck. Carter turned just in time to see her body jerk violently, her eyes wide with fear. The puppies, now fully formed, were crawling all over her, but there was something else. Something was shifting inside her. The watchers were watching closely, their faces unreadable. But Carter could sense the tension in their bodies, the barely contained anxiety. This wasn't just about her giving birth. It was something much more. Carter didn't know what to do. He had no experience with aliens, experiments, or anything like this. But one thing was clear. These creatures, these puppies, weren't just animals. They were part of something far bigger and far more dangerous. The woman's body gave one last, terrible shake, and then, with an almost terrifying force, she let out another scream. It wasn't just pain. There was something else in it. Something primal, something wild. It was as if the very earth itself was shaking with the force of her cry. Before Carter could react, the puppies began to change. Their bodies, once soft and small, began to grow, their fur darkening and becoming sharper, more aggressive. Their eyes glowed with a fierce, unnatural light. They were no longer harmless creatures. They were growing fast. Carter staggered back in shock. The watchers hadn't been lying. These creatures weren't just puppies. They were something else. Something much more dangerous. "We have to stop this now," the watcher said, his voice cold and firm. "If we don't, they'll destroy everything." Carter looked at the woman, whose body was now trembling uncontrollably. She was no longer just in pain, she was in distress. The puppies were transforming, their fangs showing, and their bodies becoming stronger by the second. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about stopping something that could destroy everything. "I'm not going to let you hurt her," Carter said, his voice shaken but resolute. He turned toward the truck, ready to fight to protect the woman and the puppies. The watchers didn't move, but their expressions were serious. "You don't have a choice," one of them said. "You can't protect her from this. No one can." The air felt heavy with the weight of their words, but Carter wasn't backing down. He didn't know what the future held, but he couldn't let this woman, this alien, be taken from him now. As the creatures continued to grow in size and strength, Carter knew that whatever happened next, his life would never be the same. And whatever the watchers were planning, he had to stop them. He had no choice. The night air felt charged, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Carter stood at the edge of the truck, watching in disbelief as the puppies, the creatures, continued to grow in size. Their bodies were now larger than the average dog, their fur darkening into a deep, almost black shade. Their eyes glowed like fiery embers, their once innocent expressions replaced by something far more predatory. Carter's mind raced. He had never seen anything like this before. He had no idea how to stop these creatures from destroying everything in their path. But he knew one thing. He couldn't just let them grow unchecked. Not while the woman, her body still trembling, was vulnerable in the back of the truck. "You need to leave," Carter said to the watchers, his voice shaking but determined. "This isn't your fight. These creatures, they're not what you think." One of the watchers stepped forward, his expression unchanging. "You don't understand," he said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "These creatures are a danger to everything, and if you don't let us stop them now, it will be too late." Carter clenched his fists. He was sick of the watchers talking down to him as if he didn't understand the gravity of the situation. Of course, he didn't understand it completely. But he knew that this wasn't just some experiment gone wrong. These creatures, these puppies, they were more than that. They were something else entirely. And he wasn't going to let anyone harm the woman who had already been through so much. "She's in pain. She's not your experiment," Carter shouted. "You can't just take her away from here." The watcher didn't flinch. "She's not just a woman," he repeated, as if Carter hadn't heard him the first time. "She's a weapon. The offspring of a dangerous species, bred to bring about destruction. And those puppies? They're the next step in an evolution that we can't allow to happen." Carter's breath caught in his throat. A weapon? The woman. Was part of a species meant to destroy everything? The words felt like a punch in the gut, but Carter didn't back down. "You're lying," he said, his voice low and fierce. "You're not getting her. Not while I'm here." The watcher seemed to hesitate, his glowing eyes flickering for just a moment. But then he shook his head, a cold, regretful smile curling at the edges of his lips. "You think you can stop this?" he asked, his voice almost pitying. "You're just a man. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Before Carter could respond, one of the larger puppies, the one closest to him, let out a deep growl, its teeth bared. The others followed suit, their growls growing louder and more threatening. They were no longer the small helpless creatures Carter had seen just moments before. Now they were powerful, their eyes glowing brighter, their bodies rippling with strength. Carter backed away slowly, his eyes darting to the woman in the truck. She was still weak, her body racked with pain as the last of the puppies forced their way out of her. But she was still alive, and that meant there was hope. He couldn't let the watchers take her. "Stay away from her," Carter warned, his voice low and steady. "I won't let you do this." The watchers exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. One of them raised his hand, a small device appearing in his palm. The air around them seemed to hum as he activated it. The glowing light from the device washed over the puppies, and for a moment, Carter thought it was some kind of weapon. But then the puppies stopped growling. Their eyes began to flicker, their bodies trembling. Carter's heart skipped a beat. What was happening? The watcher who had activated the device spoke again, his voice laced with authority. "This is your last chance. We can take her now, and the puppies can be safely contained. If you refuse, we will be forced to take more drastic measures." Carter's pulse raced as the tension in the air thickened. He had no idea what the device was doing, but he knew it wasn't good. The puppies were still twitching, their bodies wriggling as though the device was messing with their very biology. But Carter couldn't let them take the woman. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. He glanced over at the truck, where the woman's eyes fluttered weakly. She was still conscious, but barely. She had to know what was happening. He couldn't leave her to be controlled by the watchers, no matter what they said. The decision hit Carter like a lightning bolt. He didn't care how dangerous these creatures were. He didn't care how many watchers stood in front of him. He was going to protect her. He was going to fight for her and for the puppies, no matter the cost. In one swift motion, Carter dashed toward the truck. He grabbed the woman's arm, pulling her toward him. She didn't resist, but her weak, trembling form made him hesitate for a moment. "We need to go. Now," he whispered urgently, his voice barely above a breath. The puppies, their bodies shifting and growing, let out a simultaneous growl. Carter turned just in time to see the watcher start to move toward him. One of them raised his hand, preparing to use the device again. But Carter wasn't waiting around to find out what it would do. He jumped into the driver's seat of the truck, slamming the door shut behind him. With one swift motion, he put the truck in gear and slammed the accelerator down. The tires screeched, sending a cloud of dust into the air as the truck lurched forward. Carter's heart was pounding as he glanced in the rearview mirror. The watchers were still standing there, watching him with cold, calculating eyes, but he was already too far away for them to stop him. He didn't know where he was going, but he had to get away. The woman was still unconscious, her body limp in the back of the truck, and the puppies were growing stronger by the second. Carter didn't know what he was up against, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let the watchers win. Not without a fight. The truck tore down the winding road, its engine roaring as Carter pushed it to the limit. His heart was racing, but his mind was focused. The woman in the back, still unconscious, was the only thing that mattered now. The watchers would stop at nothing to take her, but Carter wasn't going to let that happen. Not on his watch. The fog around them thickened, the headlights cutting through the mist as the truck bounced over the rough terrain. Carter's grip on the steering wheel tightened as he glanced at the rearview mirror. The watchers were nowhere to be seen, but Carter didn't trust that they were gone. They had already proven that they were capable of anything, and he couldn't afford to let his guard down. The truck hit a bump, sending Carter's body lurching forward. He gripped the wheel with one hand and reached back with the other to check on the woman. Her breathing was shallow, her body still trembling from the strain of what had just happened. The puppies in the back of the truck were now eerily quiet, but their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. Carter didn't know what they were, but he knew they were growing stronger by the second. He couldn't let them get out of control. They weren't just animals anymore. They were becoming something else entirely. And as much as he wanted to protect the woman and her strange offspring, he couldn't ignore the fact that they were dangerous. He slammed his foot down on the gas, pushing the truck faster. He had to find a place to hide, somewhere to regroup and figure out what to do next. He couldn't keep running forever. And he couldn't do this alone. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden high-pitched whine that came from the back of the truck. Carter glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the puppies, the creatures moving again. Their bodies were now fully grown, their size nearly matching that of a full-grown wolf. Their glowing eyes locked onto Carter's, and for a moment, he felt as though they were staring directly into his soul. One of the creatures let out a low growl, its fur bristling. Carter's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if they were simply hungry or if they were starting to act on instinct. But either way, he wasn't about to wait around to find out. Suddenly, the truck's engine sputtered. Carter's stomach dropped as the vehicle lurched, slowing down. No, he muttered, his voice panicked. The truck was losing power. He tried to push the accelerator down harder, but the engine sputtered again, its roar growing weaker. In the rearview mirror, Carter saw something that made his blood run cold. The watchers were back. They were riding in sleek black vehicles, moving fast, too fast for him to outrun. Carter's stomach twisted with fear. There was no way he could outrun them now. His only option was to find a place to hide. He scanned the road ahead, looking for somewhere to turn off. His eyes caught a narrow dirt path that veered off into the trees. Without thinking, he jerked the wheel hard to the left, sending the truck bouncing across the uneven road. The tires squealed as they slid across the dirt, and the truck crashed through the brush, forcing its way deeper into the forest. The truck's engine sputtered again, but it kept going. Carter gritted his teeth and pressed the accelerator, his eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. The watchers were still chasing him, their vehicles cutting through the trees like shadows. He couldn't keep running forever. Please, come on, Carter muttered under his breath, his fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. He was pushing the truck past its limits, but it had to hold together just a little longer. The truck bumped over rocks and debris, the tires slipping in the mud, but Carter didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He had to get to safety. As the trees grew denser, the light from the headlights barely pierced through the fog. The road ahead was unclear, and Carter had no idea where it led, but he kept driving, hoping to lose the watchers in the thick forest. The creatures in the back of the truck shifted again, their growls growing louder, their eyes burning with a strange, unnatural hunger. Carter knew they were getting restless, but he didn't have time to worry about them. He just had to get away. Finally, the truck came to a sudden halt. Carter's heart jumped in his chest as he looked up to find that the path had ended abruptly. There was no more road, just a steep drop into a ravine below. The trees ahead were too thick to drive through, and the truck was stuck. He slammed the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt just inches from the edge. Panic set in as Carter realized he was trapped. There was no way out. The watchers were closing in. The creatures were restless in the back of the truck, and Carter had nowhere to go. A loud bang echoed through the trees, followed by the sound of a vehicle coming to a stop behind him. Carter whipped his head around and saw the Watcher's black vehicles screech to a halt at the top of the ravine. The figures stepped out, their expressions hard, their movements purposeful. Carter didn't know what they planned to do, but he wasn't going to let them take her. He wasn't going to give up. Not now, not when he was so close. The woman in the back of the truck stirred again, her eyes fluttering open. She was still weak, but she looked at Carter, her gaze filled with an urgent, almost desperate intensity. "Go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You have to go. They'll hurt you." Carter shook his head. "I'm not leaving you." The woman's eyes softened for a moment, and she whispered again, this time more forcefully. "Please, if you want to survive, you have to run. Get as far away as you can." Before Carter could respond, one of the Watchers raised his hand, and the air around them hummed again, the device glowing with an ominous light. "Run," she whispered, her voice trembling. Without another word, Carter threw open the door and ran into the dense forest, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know where he was going, but he couldn't stay there. Not with the Watchers closing in. Not with the puppies growing stronger by the second. He had to survive. He had to protect her. And he had to find a way to stop the Watchers before it was too late. Carter's heart was hammering in his chest as he sprinted through the dense forest, the thick trees closing in on him like walls. His breath came in ragged gasps, the fog around him swirling, making it hard to see where he was going. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Behind him, he could hear the footsteps of the Watchers, their pursuit relentless. He didn't know how long he could keep running, but there was no choice. The woman's plea still echoed in his mind, a whisper that urged him forward. If you want to survive, you have to run. But he wasn't just running for his life. He was running to protect her, to protect the puppies, those strange growing creatures who were no longer harmless. They were dangerous, and the Watchers were determined to stop them. But Carter knew that they couldn't control everything. He had to fight back. The sound of the Watchers' footsteps faded behind him, but Carter knew they weren't far behind. The thick forest was the only thing that separated him from them now. He needed to lose them. He needed a plan. A sudden noise stopped him in his tracks, a growl. His eyes widened as he turned, half expecting to see one of the creatures that had been born in the back of the truck. But this was different. It wasn't the puppies. It was something bigger. Out of the fog stepped the woman, no longer the weak, trembling figure she had been just moments ago. Her orange fur shimmered in the dim light, and her eyes burned with an unnatural intensity. She was standing tall now, her body strong, her posture defiant. The faint glow from her fur had turned into a brilliant, fiery radiance. She was no longer just a victim, she was a force. The Watchers were still coming, but now Carter realized that she wasn't just someone to protect anymore. She was the key to everything. And she wasn't going to let anyone take her or her puppies without a fight. "You're not alone," Carter breathed, his voice full of awe and disbelief. The woman turned her gaze toward him, her eyes filled with a strange mix of gratitude and determination. "I never was," she said, her voice stronger than before. "I've been waiting for this." Before Carter could respond, the ground beneath their feet shook. The puppies, the creatures had caught up, but they weren't small and harmless anymore. They were massive, their bodies now the size of wolves, their eyes glowing like molten lava. They let out a fierce collective howl, their growls echoing through the forest like a warning. Carter's pulse raced. They were ready. They were no longer the innocent babies he had seen earlier. They had evolved, grown faster than he could have ever imagined. And now, they were at the woman's side, ready to fight. The Watchers appeared at the edge of the clearing, their black vehicles blocking any chance of escape. They stepped out slowly, their eyes cold and calculating. their expressions unreadable. But now it was clear. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to end it. Carter stepped closer to the woman, who stood tall and unyielding, the glowing creatures flanking her. He didn't know what would happen next. But one thing was clear, this wasn't going to end the way the Watchers expected. The lead Watcher raised his hand, and the device in his palm hummed to life. He pointed it at the woman, aiming to disable her. But before he could press the button, one of the puppies lunged forward, its powerful body knocking the device from the Watcher's hand. The Watchers flinched, but they didn't retreat. They were too determined. Another Watcher raised his hand to deploy a different weapon, but before he could, the woman's voice rang out louder and more commanding than before. "This ends now," she said, her voice resonating with a power Carter had never heard before. The creatures around her growled in agreement, their eyes glowing brighter. The ground trembled again as if the forest itself was responding to her call. With a sudden swift motion, the woman extended her arms, and the ground exploded beneath the Watchers' feet. A wave of energy surged from her, knocking the Watchers off their feet and sending them crashing to the ground. The force of it was overwhelming, and Carter had to shield his eyes from the blinding light. When the dust cleared, the Watchers were on the ground, stunned but alive. They slowly began to rise, their expressions filled with disbelief. The woman stepped forward, her movements graceful and powerful, her eyes burning with the intensity of a force that had been unleashed. "This world is not yours to control," she said, her voice steady and cold. "You will leave, now." The Watchers didn't speak. They didn't need to. It was clear they had underestimated her, underestimated them all. Slowly, reluctantly, they backed away, their eyes lingering on Carter and the woman before they turned to leave. Their vehicles roared to life, retreating into the fog as the woman's gaze followed them. Carter stood still, his heart still racing from the intensity of the confrontation. The puppies were quiet now, their glowing eyes dimming slightly as they circled around the woman. They weren't just animals. They were something more, something powerful, something that could no longer be contained. The woman turned to him, her expression softening. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You helped me when I had nothing left. You gave me a chance." Carter didn't know what to say. All of this had happened so quickly, so unexpectedly. But one thing was certain, he couldn't walk away now. "I'm not leaving," he said, his voice steady. The woman smiled, a hint of warmth in her eyes. "Then you will see what we will become. Together." As the woman and the creature stood before him, Carter realized that the world he once knew was gone. In its place was something new, something dangerous, and something extraordinary. And as he looked at the glowing creatures, now quiet and content, he knew that whatever came next, he would face it with them. The forest was still. The Watchers had retreated, but the future was uncertain. One thing was clear though, the story of the Vulpine Girl had only just begun.